I have found that as a leader, um, the important piece is to be open, listening, creating space for people. We're doing hard work, and if you come in saying we have all the answers, it doesn't work. Certainly not in today's world. Creating space, creating opportunity, listening to people. You also need to be clear at some point, right? You have to say, okay, this is the direction we're going. This is where we need to do what I believe is important for the organization. But, the environment you create is really critically important to ensure that people are heard, to create a psychologically safe environment where people can be challenging to you and, be prepared. As a leader, you've got to be prepared to listen to hard things and take it and receive it.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably the world. Chief Influencer spotlights leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy environment. Social Driver teamed up with the George Washington University College of Professional Studies and Communications Board to recognize these leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Dr. Tim Coetzee, President and CEO of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. The organization's mission is to cure MS while helping those affected by MS live their best lives. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things I think you should know about today's guest. Number one, Dr. Coetzee is a foremost expert on MS who's worked in the field for more than 30 years. As a scientist in 1993, he began working on a National MS Society-funded team to understand the brain and ways to repair myelin damage. Number two, throughout his 24-plus year career at the National MS Society, Tim has bridged science with advocacy. He served as Chief Advocacy Services and Science Officer, and early in his career, Dr. Coetzee was instrumental in elevating the Society's research program. He established a robust career funding initiative investing over $30 million in researchers working to advance MS therapies worldwide. Number three, Tim has pioneered innovative approaches to advance the Society's mission. He founded Fast Forward, the Society's commercial research venture, which has invested more than $25 million to expedite the development of new MS treatments. He also created the Barancik Prize for Innovation in MS Research, the largest global prize in MS. Tim, you've been called many things: a respected voice in the MS movement, a leading health advocate, scientist, innovator, and of course, chief executive. Well, today we are thrilled to call you Chief Influencer. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. What an introduction. Thank you, Anthony. Hey, let's dispense with the doctor bit and just let's stick it with Tim. Let's go with first names if that's
okay. I'm happy to do that. Thanks. Okay, so I have to start just by asking you, this is interesting background from everything that you've done. And as a scientist, but now CEO of the National MS Society, I know one of your top priorities just has to be making sure that people know what MS is, how they can make a difference. So to start, what do you want policymakers, funders, and even the public to know about MS?
Yeah. So first thing I'd want people to know often is that MS is a disease that has treatments, that if a person is diagnosed with the disease, that, some of the old stereotypes about MS no longer are true, that, you're destined for a wheelchair or a scooter, no longer true. We have treatments. We have doctors that are much better able to diagnose the disease quickly, treat a person. And all of this is the result of the investments in research and healthcare that have been part of the fabric of what we know in the United States as our really world-leading medical research enterprise. And I think in today's environment in particular, it's really important for influencers like myself and other people around to say how important it is that we continue to sustain our global leadership so that we can make a difference in the lives of humans. The oftentimes research is reduced, well, it's a bunch of eggheads studying stuff because they're super interested in stuff. And it is true, I'm a nerd, and I came into science because I was interested in those kinds of things. But the practical reality is also all of those people working on important questions lead to treatments that transform lives. And, today MS is fundamentally different because of all of those investments. So that's one of the things I think it's so important for us to say over and over again.
So you mentioned just how much things have changed. I actually can remember when I was in second grade, someone in Kansas City, someone from a local organization, it might have even been a chapter or something of the National MS Society, I'm not sure, came and talked to our class about MS. And to be honest, what I can remember is it being kind of scary because there's no cure. And there's, at least at the time, maybe today too, it was very unpredictable. Um, and it was kind of like a difficult session, I think,
Mhm.
for us to go through, although obviously very educational for young
Mhm.
people to know about things like this. And I know a lot has happened over the last 30 plus years. So can you just kind of level set a little bit for somebody who might have just a bit of exposure to MS about,
Sure.
what it is, and then also how things have changed. If I went to an elementary school today and somebody talked about MS, what are some of the things they might tell those kids that would be
Yeah.
different from when I learned about it?
It's so interesting because probably the person that went over was probably my one of my former CEOs, Joyce Nelson, who was the chapter president in Kansas City, probably when you were in second grade.
Oh my gosh.
And she's one of the people I learned an awful lot about. Talk about a real chief influencer. She was an amazing CEO, and started at the MS Society as one of the program leaders in Kansas City. So, um,
Small world.
small world. So let's start first with what is MS. So MS is a disease of the brain and spinal cord, as you said. Basically, what it what happens is the immune system attacks the brain. It disrupts the flow of information from our brain and spinal cord to our body to tell us how to live and talk. And I'm moving my hands if people are watching this. Uh, all of that information about how our brain works gets disrupted. And what's really changed over the years is that it used to be that first it took a long time to diagnose the disease, decades. Sometimes people could
Oh,
have
wow.
all these symptoms, and the doctor would be like, maybe it's MS, maybe it's not MS. Um, but and that there was just a huge amount of uncertainty, which is what was also true about MS when our founder Sylvia Lowry started this organization almost 80 years ago. Fast forward to today, and today a person could be diagnosed in a few months from their first symptom. We're trying to get that down to weeks, maybe
Mhm.
days. I would love it if we could get it to hours, where it just takes one test and you're on your way. But really, from the time you were in second grade, back then it would have been like 4 or 5 years to get
Mhm.
diagnosed. Today it can be much quicker. Um, the other piece, what's changed is that we now have dozens of treatments for the disease. That the way they work is that they slow down the disease, prevent it from attacking your brain, prevent the damage that can be so debilitating. And so today, the prognosis is so much better. Where a person, some of the misconceptions are that you're diagnosed with MS and you have a wheelchair or a scooter in your future. Not true today. If a person starts a disease modifying treatment, they can go on and live, really powerfully and live well. We don't have all the solutions to MS. I don't want to mislead and oversell it. There's still a lot about the disease that's unknown. People experience fatigue, pain, and all those pieces, but we are able to treat it, and that has been such a profound change over the last decade
Mhm.
for our community.
Yeah, and that's such an important message to get across because if somebody thinks that, a diagnosis is hopeless, then there's kind of a for many of us, we might just want to put our head in the sand and go, "Oh, I'd rather not even know because what are they going
Yeah.
to do?" But when a diagnosis actually can lead to a lot of different treatment options, then I mean, obviously it makes sense for people to know that information so they can do something with it and keep their lives going.
Exactly. We haven't solved the whole disease, but there's a lot that we can do today. There is a lot of hope doctors can give. And the work that I do at the MS Society, along with our community, our global community, is now we have to finish the work. We haven't found the cure. We haven't found the cause. We don't have a cure yet. There are still aspects about MS that we don't fully understand that we need to address. And that's why I'm out telling the story about we've made incredible progress since our
Yeah.
founding. Life today is fundamentally better than it was, but we have to finish the work. And that's why we need to stay focused on the path ahead.
So let's talk about storytelling a little bit, and let's talk about how you break through with the right message to the right people. You might be speaking to scientists, researchers, doctors, members of Congress, senators, local community members, patients, families. I mean, I imagine that you have days where you are talking to many of those audiences, if not all of those audiences, as you're jumping from one thing to another. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you target your message and kind of tailor your message around the work that you just described to those different audiences.
Yeah, no, that's a really important thing you raise, and as leaders, as a CEO, and as a senior leader, I believe one communication and clear simple communication is so important, but also the important thing that we need to think about as chief influencers for your audience is narrative, story, being able to have, paint mental pictures for people so that they can understand very simply and clearly what you're going for as an organization. And oftentimes I think people think, well, I've got to tailor my message for the scientists to be more technical than for other audiences. And my response to that is actually no, you need to actually use the same type of narrative across all the audiences. For example, the themes I am striking today is, what I have called sort of my four declarations that, you know, what I want people to imagine is a world where, as I've shared with you, they can be diagnosed in hours rather than months and years. That's a world that we can see and imagine, and that can work with whether you're a person who's like just one of our general supporters. It's what's the MS Society going for? It's like I want a person to be able to know that those tingling symptoms they might be having in their leg is MS or not. Just let's get that clarity, and that's true for doctors. I could say, wouldn't you want a world where a person shows up and you're like, let's see you in a year and see if something happens? Wouldn't you want to give them a test that you just rules it in or out? Wouldn't that be powerful? And it with the scientists, I'm being provocative because they'll say, well, we've got to do lots of research and we've got to do this and that. And I'm like, I I get it. I'm with you. But how about we push ourselves to not to set a goal, set an aspiration on the one hand with them, and then with the other audiences, I'm aiming to inspire to say, wouldn't it be amazing that we can have that world? And so that's one of the declarations. I Another narrative that I'm using is I want a person to be able to have an affordable treatment that's right for them and the type of MS they can. Uh, a third declaration is that they have guides, people that can walk alongside them to support them in the twists and turns about MS. And then the last one being, you know, can can we imagine a world where a diagnosis of MS is nothing to fear because we have a cure?
Hmm.
And those pillars are something that I say over and over again because they have utility in both inspiring audiences about what I want us to go for as an organization. They're powerful with donors because it tells people, hey, here's something that I can give. I can use that with lobbyists and congressmen because you're in DC and going on Capitol Hill, you have all of 30 seconds probably
Yeah.
with that congressman or their staffer, and also with scientists. And so for me, that's the theme of something that you can use in all the different settings, that has enough technical to be challenging to the scientists, but also enough inspirational so that people know where we're going.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, the way you broke that down, what you call your four declarations, um, I can see just and hear from as a communications sort of framework how that helps guide you, but also how that can really give a blueprint to your team members because obviously you can't be in every room. And so saying,
Exactly.
speed of diagnosis, number one, and um, you know, um, the treatment plan number two, and having a guide and navigator number three, and taking that fear away number four, just making it very easy,
Mhm.
memorable, connects with people, and others on your team can also emulate that. I think that that is so important. And I think a lot of us could benefit from taking the messaging that we have and making sure we structure it that way so that it can be more scalable across our organization.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things, so this is where my interest in politics, I've always followed politics and, uh, you know, David Gergen, who, well-known, communicator, often, told Ronald Reagan back in the day, I'm gonna give you messaging and you're gonna say it over and over again. You're gonna say it so often you're gonna want to throw up, and then I'm gonna tell you to say it again.
Mhm.
And as chief influencers, I think Gergen's advice from a communication standpoint is so apt. I mean, oftentimes we think, oh, I'm just so tired of saying that over and over again. And one of the things I am actually very dogmatic about is no, those four pillars we don't tinker with them. They're very
Yeah.
specific. You have to say it over and over and over and over again. And it's important to recognize that, if you're not if you don't have message discipline, it then is hard for people to know what you stand for.
Right.
And I think as a chief influencer, it's really important not to sort of get bored with it, but to stick with the discipline. At least that's my view in today's world, because otherwise you become fragmented in your message and you lose your ability to be as influential, I believe.
I'm with you on that. I think that's such an important lesson. And, some leaders, like, they might put a speech together and they say everything, and then it's almost as if they expect everybody to have memorized it. And it's like, well, no, you have to keep saying the same thing over and over again because, our brains are not tape recorders, and we
Mhm.
don't, remember every single detail, especially now that things are so fragmented. There's so much snackable content. That discipline of continuing to go back to the message. I mean, again, it's not a new thing. You gave an example of David Gergen giving that advice to Ronald Reagan, but maybe today I could say it's even more important than ever before because of the distractions and the landscape. And people are on multiple. They're listening to you at a conference, but they're looking at their phone at the same time. So making sure that that
Yeah.
message is continuing to be repeated.
Exactly. I'm generally a very flexible leader, but my team also knows that I can be a stickler about certain things. And message discipline is one of the ones that I'm a bit of a stickler around because, to your point, in the fragmented world today, you lose your ability to be influential.
Yeah. So let's take a step back a little bit to talk about your career journey. Um, because, when it comes to healthcare, I know that we need scientists and we also need advocates, but often they're not the same person. And you're both. You were a scientist working on mRNAs. Then you got into brain research. Now you're at the helm of a nonprofit. How did that happen?
I'll be the first to tell you it's not the journey I thought I would be on when I graduated from college and went to graduate school for, as you said, to become a molecular biologist studying mRNA. Uh, it's it was a twisty and winding journey. So, I started out as very much a traditional scientist, was going to be a university researcher, had aspirations to be a professor, having a lab, mentoring people, and I was on that track. Um, but along the way, one of the aspects of my journey was when I was in postgraduate training. We call them fellowships, postdoctoral fellowships. Um, Working in the lab, I started to really get interested in this concept, this notion of, well, what else is out there besides the lab bench? Is there something else out there? But I was also interested that the postdoctoral fellows, as we are known, who are sort of really a core part of medical research today, are back then were the ultimate gig workers. Well, before we had the gig workers of today, fellows, went from lab to lab, getting training, hustling for funding, and I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And I had received funding from the National Mass Society through a fellowship to launch my career, and I just was exploring, like, are there other ways to do this? Got to know the nonprofit sector, got to understand how the system worked, and then in the spring of 2000, the opportunity to come join the National MS Society, to be part of the team that manages the funds that we put to work, presented itself. And so I thought, well, why don't I give that a try? I thought, well, if the private sector doesn't work, and I can always go back to university research 25 years later, obviously it took. And once I moved from being hands-on lab research then being more an enabler of it, by providing funding. I then got to see how, you know, the medical research enterprise needs both the doers, the people that are asking the questions, trying to tackle the hard questions, but they also need, another part of that ecosystem are organizations like ours that are the ones telling the story about why it's important to support these scientists, but also, stewarding donors, creating programs to fill gaps. And that I'm a inherently curious person, so that's one of the things I'd say as a chief influencer. I was curious to learn, well, how does this work? What would be the pieces? Where are the places where you can exert influence over a process? And so it was in that context that I then got to see all the other aspects of the nonprofit leadership. That's when I started to really get an interest in what does it mean to be a leader, and what does it mean to be a good boss, good supervisor, good manager. And again, just learning, growing, staying curious all along the way. Were I'd say the contributors that led to my development as an individual leader. But then also I'd say to parts of your audience where there's someone who's thinking, well, what's in the future for me? Where can I go? One of the other aspects is being willing to consider trying something new, because unless you're willing to try to take a risk and try a new role, you may miss opportunities to grow and develop as a leader. And I'll use Fast Forward, which is one of the programs that I helped start that you mentioned in my intro. So that was a concept that my one of my former bosses, Dr. John Rickert, had brought when he came in as head of research for the MS Society. He was interested in creating a program that funded biotech companies. Up to that point, we'd only funded universities. It was a controversial idea. It needed we needed to garner support from the board, from the community, create a business plan for how we were going to do this. We created our own nonprofit entity to do this. He asked everybody else in the department if they'd be willing to try it. The people more senior than me, nobody wanted to touch this, and I was either too dumb or maybe curious enough to say, "Hey, I'll give it a try." And so I plunged in. I took a risk and ended up, you know, changing jobs, changing roles, working with the CEO to basically create this organization that is still going to this day that funds biotech research. And it is that one of the things about growing as a leader is you need to be prepared to move from one role to another and leave the old role behind and take a risk. And if you don't take risks, you miss opportunities, and that was certainly true all along my career. So being curious, willing to learn, but also taking risks is important. One last piece I will say is I also haven't given up my scientific interest. I still will read the journals. I stay very much in touch with the community while I'm not actually in the lab doing research. I really try to stay on top of what's happening in the field, because having the ability to have a technical conversation with a scientist, uh, and also talk with our CFO about our income, our P&L, are really important and are just something that I try to maintain as a discipline.
Do you think that gives you a type of credibility with certain stakeholder groups that you're a scientist and you're reading the journals and that you can speak that language?
Yes, I have found that it does. I can get indoors and in conversations because I have an advanced degree. I've done research in the area. I've continued to publish, so I've been very involved in initiatives, and so I continue to have peer-reviewed publications. And so having that has been a very important aspect of technical credibility, which has enabled me to help tell the story of the National MS Society in a way that, with some audiences, because I have that technical background, I leverage it, and it is one of those aspects that I'm continuing to learn of in the role of chief influencer. There's chief influencer from the standpoint of being CEO, which is really helpful, but then to also not minimize the fact that I'm also 30 plus years of a scientific background and expertise, and that that is something that can be used to the advantage of the MS Society, which is what I seek to do.
Yeah, and as I was looking at your bio and the shift in role, my I might have even been thinking, "Oh, you were in this role as a scientist and you've pivoted and shifted your influence." But hearing you talk about that, actually, it sounds like you've layered on different types of influence
Mhm,
because you're still a scientist and you're still, you mentioned publishing and
mhm.
reviewing the journals, but you added on these other layers of, well, now you're meeting with members of Congress and you're giving TV interviews and I guess what I want to ask is to layer on those things that maybe you didn't imagine 30 years ago that you would be doing, the more public facing things. Was that something you were excited about, or were you a little anxious? Was it out of your comfort zone? And how did
Yeah.
you decide to embrace those types of additional influence responsibilities?
Yeah, no, a great question. So, um, it's a journey. So I think part of it is just learning and growing and getting out there and doing. The thing about when you're in science is you actually have to be a communicator for to be a successful scientist. You know, we get taught very early how to give presentations, how to do things. You know, when I came to the MS Society, I was expected to go out and visit chapters, give talks. I was really clumsy and bad at it early early on. I mean, I was just awful. That anybody, you know, stayed awake during my droning scientific presentations early on as a staff member is, I feel bad for them. I've gotten a lot better in CRISPR. I've learned. I've had good mentors. I've actually become a real fan of Nancy Duarte's work as a communicator. She's a very effective at helping people think about how to use visuals. So really passionate about that. She did a lot of Steve Jobs presentations for them, so that's why I got attuned to that. So part of it for me has been there's the content, but also the craft that goes with communications and the craft of of um, you know developing narrative, whether it's the medium we're in or other mediums, and honing that. Now there are people that are way better than me on this, and so part of what I do is I take it as a discipline to study and understand and see who are some really good communicators. And obviously it needs to fit with me and my style. So I'm not going to try to be Tim Coetzee mimicking Steve Jobs in the black turtleneck. That's never going to be me. But looking at the kinds of communication devices that people use and tools and learning tips and tricks along the way. I That's how I view it. I view the work we're doing as CEOs and as chief influencers as there's a craft to it, and one just has to continue to hone and just get better at it all along the way.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. I'm a proud GW graduate myself, and I can attest that the faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Yeah, 100%. And I think I appreciate what you shared there that you felt like you were a bit clumsy presenting early on and that you've grown in that area. Because sometimes folks can see somebody who's, very comfortable, very concise, very polished, like you are today, and just think, well, that's just a natural ability. That person was always like that. And I always think it's really powerful when that person says, actually, no, it took a lot of practice. And one of our guests was Terry Zuplat, one of the speechwriters for Barack Obama. And somebody asked after that interview, we had a Q&A after that one, and they said, oh, well, what's it like working with somebody who's just a naturally gifted speaker? And he told a story about how Barack Obama had an experience when he was younger where he was really nervous. He gave this really bad speech, and that like he wasn't just a naturally gifted speaker, that it was something that he had to embrace and he had to work on to become, what people probably see as one of the greatest orators of our time. And so I think that piece of the
Yeah.
journey is so important. And I appreciate you sharing that, that you felt like, you weren't where you wanted to be. And it's an area that you invested in improving.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the recognitions early on is that, I spent too much time trying to be like other people rather than learning from other people and, um, finding the place that is right for me and
Mhm.
also staying humble that, there's people that can give you good feedback. And that's one of um, the things that I think is so important as a leader, so critical.
So we've been talking a little bit about influence on the outside, like
Hmm.
I was asking you about shifting into, being on TV and talking to members of Congress, but I wondered if we could talk about influence on the inside,
Hmm.
because I know you have more than 700 employees at the National MS Society, plus many more
Hmm.
volunteers and donors and others. And I wonder if you could talk about what you've learned as a leader, about the importance and the ability to influence your own community in the inside.
Yeah. So I think part of it is, one, you need to be clear about who you are and where you stand and what are your non-negotiables, but what are the areas that you're willing to learn and explore and grow. I have found that as a leader, um, the important piece is to be open, listening, creating space for people. We're doing hard work, and if you come in saying you have we have all the answers, that's just not, um it doesn't work. Certainly not in today's world. Creating space, creating opportunity, listening to people. You also need to be clear at some point, right? You have to say, okay, this is the direction we're going. This is where we need to do what I believe is important for the organization. But the environment you create is really critically important to ensure that people are heard, to create a psychologically safe environment where people can be challenging to you and be prepared. As a leader, you've got to be prepared to take to listen to hard things and not and take it and receive it. I found myself in a situation recently where I'm having this meeting, and it's a group of individuals, and this one person said, I wasn't sure you were going to be the right CEO for us. I'm 6 months in as CEO, and and of course the person said, and now of course I'm really thrilled, you know, and I was happy that they felt comfortable in the environment we created to say, I wasn't sure. I had my
Mhm.
doubts. A lot of leaders don't want to hear that others had doubts about them as their leader. And I think the most important thing that we can do as chief influencers is to say, it's okay for you to share with me that you had your doubts, that you were on a journey, that here's something that we, need to work on together. Because if you're so certain that you have all of the answers as the leader, then you've actually lost influence. Because the leader who thinks that you can influence by top down it's never going to work. You might make some grudging progress with people, but end of the day, you are not going to be as effective as an influencer as if you create an environment where people can bring who they are and succeed. The other element I'll say about internal is that for me, I'm always looking for the opportunity to ensure that some of the talent we have has an opportunity to shine. As senior lead, one of the most important things I think senior leaders can do is step back from time to time and let the people that are part of the team show us their incredible potential.
Mm.
There is so much hidden potential, often hidden in plain sight, and we just don't see it. And I think one of the most influential things you can do internally is to create an environment where people just bring their talent and shine, and really can take the organization in places that you, as a senior leader, may not have imagined.
So, what are some of the ways that you create that environment? The environment for people to shine and the environment for people to feel comfortable expressing
Yeah.
doubts. Because I'm sure, any of us can hear that and say, yeah, that sounds like a good environment. But creating that environment might be more difficult to figure out how to do.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, it's a good question. So it's a work in progress. So it depends on the context. One of the things I've done in virtual settings, for example, because so much of our work is done virtually with virtual teams, is to actually make sure that I'm paying attention to the people who aren't talking in a meeting. And I also do that in an in-person meeting, because oftentimes the people that talk the most and the loudest voices get a lot of the attention. As a leader, I'm actually watching for who's not talking, who is who needs to create that space to engage and to create opportunity. So that's how I approach it in team meetings. As CEO, one of the things I've implemented is, quarterly CEO town halls, where it's an ask me anything kind of setting, and no pre-filtering of the questions. Anybody can get on and ask anything.
Hmm.
And I've also instituted what I call CEO office hours, where twice a month there are blocks of time where anybody can contact our chief of staff, set up a 20-minute slot with me. There's no agenda for the meeting. It's whatever you want to share with me. And it could be an issue that somebody's confronting, or it could be their favorite cookies, whatever people want to talk about. And I believe that's how by reducing barriers and reducing distance, it really helps people feel engaged and inspires individuals to their best. Lastly, the other piece, as a senior leader, so since this is the chief influencers,
Hmm.
show, I mean, for me, part of it is the role of an influencer like ours is to create the space and opportunity for people to be more than themselves and to do the good things they can possibly do. If we do that, then we as influencers are really having the maximum effect. Last thing I'll also say, I know this is the last of the last things
Hmm.
on this topic, is um, as influencers, we just can't take ourselves too seriously. When a person is taking them, when you're chief, that to be a chief is a sort of can be an intoxicating title, and you just can't take yourself too seriously, because the minute you take yourself too seriously, I think that again diminishes your influence as a
Hmm.
leader.
Well, that might be part of the answer to what I want to ask as a follow up here, which is when you say I have these quarterly town halls that people can come and there are unfiltered questions and you can ask anything. I know there are other folks who might hear that and go, "Uh-oh, that sounds really dangerous," or, "Well, yeah, I'd like to do that, but you see, the problem is I can't do that because we're going through XYZ right now." A lot of organizations just don't reduce barriers in that way. So what do you say to a CEO that says, "Well, I can't have an open town hall, ask me anything. Uh,
Yeah,
that's not gonna work for me." What would you say to them?
I'd say to that CEO, you can't afford not to. So I'll put the context first. We had been through a particularly challenging period in the 6 months before I was asked to be given the privilege of serving as CEO. We'd had a significant reduction in workforce. Morale was particularly challenged, and it was just, staff were in a difficult place. And when we were having the virtual town hall to introduce me as CEO, you know, there were we actually thought carefully about that moment. So one of the things I think about as CEO is the moments that we interface with people. That's how we remember life, is the
Mhm.
moments of intersection and the moments of that. And I'm a real fan of the work of Chip and Dan Heath about the moments that matter. I can see you've got Reset on your bookshelf back there.
Yeah.
Just finished listening to Reset, which was
That's
awesome.
a
But
good one, and I love The Power of Moments. I have that one at home,
yeah,
but
moments and those moments of inspiration, moments of elevation, are kind of two themes that I think about a lot. And so, when we were getting ready for my intro, I only get one chance at an intro. And so then, we thought about, like, how do we humanize Tim the human, as we call it, because people know me as this leader. And so part of it was showing a picture of my son's wedding when he married his husband Dan, and had a picture of my wife and my daughter, my niece and nephew, who are basically our adopted kids, and their grandkids, their kids, who are now my grandkids, so to speak. And we show this picture, and there's just this wave of emojis and
Mhm.
lots of love being on, and it was very emotional for me. And I heard from staff about, like, okay, that helped separate some distance between you. But then others said, but then it was the open Q&A. It's like my introduction as CEO. We had the first CEO town hall where I
Mm,
we said, let's just see what will people ask, and had a variety of challenging questions. How is it that we found ourselves here? And I answered and gave people context for what are my commitments to them about telling the truth and ensuring that we never get to where we were before. Some people said to me, well, what do you think about fundraising? We've been told that it's a necessary evil for nonprofit
mm,
organizations. And I used that moment to say, no, actually, I believe that, we are a fundraising organization. We're here to raise money to put it to work through a noble mission. So this phrase that's become sort of stock within our organization, that we're a fundraising organization with a noble mission, that all came out of this, and it gave staff a moment to be inspired. It's also, I will say, it's a scary place. One of the other town halls, somebody, came, you know, put me right on the spot with a question, and part of the discipline you need to learn is to be able to say, when you try to answer the question, or say, what, be vulnerable enough to say, I don't have the answer to that question. I'm gonna check with someone and follow up with you
yeah,
on that, rather than try to fill the air.
yeah,
That honesty goes a long way. And so I'd say to CEOs who are concerned about the kind of vulnerability, or if their internal PR people are like, don't go there, um, I would say you can't afford in today's environment to not go there,
yeah.
would be my view.
Some of our fellow chief influencers that are thinking about that, CEOs might they might want to give you a call and
Yeah.
chat before they do it for the first time. Sounds like you're a great source of wisdom
Yeah.
on how to manage that.
Now, I will say I wasn't alone. So I had people around me. I had our internal marketing team and other, folks around us. But, I think, if you're not prepared to take risks like this, then you do create distance between the
Yeah.
leadership and the staff, which is not helpful in today's world.
Well, the other thing you said that I think is interesting is just, obviously your organization spread out. You had to do this um, introduction town hall when you became CEO virtually. So, you didn't say there was a physical applause in the auditorium where I was. You said there was a flood of emoji that was coming through the platform that you were on. And that kind of indicates, how things have changed so much in the
Mhm.
workplace and how we have to find ways to show up through that human connection, even if it's through a screen, like it was
Mhm.
in your case. And I wanted to sort of ask you about how else you do that, because I know you're a CEO who's
Mhm.
personally active on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And I'm sure some of your peers, other CEOs ask you, well, how do you make the time for that? I don't have time for that. And we're seeing more and more leaders embrace it. We certainly hear about it through many of our chief influencers. We even had a special episode where it was a panel of three of our chief influencer CEOs all just talking about LinkedIn.
Yep.
But I'd love to just kind of hear your approach to that
Mhm.
platform and why you think it's even valuable for you to spend time there.
Yeah, fascinating question. So first off, my journey with LinkedIn is over multiple years. So first thing to share with your team is, like, up until now, I have managed my own LinkedIn completely. No one else has managed it for me, except for when I was being introduced as CEO. So I gave some of my credentials so that they wanted in real time to change it, and I said, okay, that's fine. So our head of HR actually went in and changed it as I was being introduced. So the
Nice.
one time I've surrendered my LinkedIn to someone else. But I have learned and practiced. I try to study what others are doing and seeing what works really well. If you were to look through my LinkedIn, you'd see how it's become very, sort of refined, shorter posts, single sentence types of paragraphs, that kind of thing, to really try to understand what works. Create a good hook line, understanding when do pictures and video work better, and just to get to know the algorithm a bit better. I am also, now this is a personal choice. I am very monogamous about the topic. I only talk about multiple sclerosis on my LinkedIn. I don't talk about anything else. I know there are other people that use it for leadership, this, that, or the other thing. I just have made it very much about the organization and what I'm going for. That's a personal choice. There are others that do other things, but that's been my choice. I also leverage tools wherever I can. So, using pictures that have, multiple panels of different things can be super helpful. And actually the tools we have today make it very easy to do that. You don't have to go out and use Canva. I am certain every single person listening to this show knows how to use PowerPoint. And if you can take 4 pictures, drop them into PowerPoint, it can make a collage for you in less than 15 seconds, give you different options. You can put text on it, you make it into a picture, away you go. In less than an hour, you can get it done. And I actually think that that discipline is very helpful for a CEO. It really forces you to think about what is the message you want to say. And I am pretty strategic about what I try to do. I really don't try to be random with my LinkedIn. I am trying to drive an agenda. I've got to, what I'm working on as when I was not CEO, I would try to do something once a week and sort of be more of like, here's interesting stuff around the sector. The shift when you become CEO is now you need to become a bit more strategic around how you use it as the platform. So my cadence is a little less, but I'm now thinking more about, are there specific things I'm trying to say through this? And so that's the evolution of it. That's me. I think, the important thing is, my advice to your audience is, find your voice, get get go use the platform so that it's authentic to you, but then also pay attention to what is happening within the platform and the algorithm, and continue
Yeah.
to tune your your content to the what works on the platform. And that is an important aspect of things as well.
It goes back to the curiosity you talked about
Yeah.
earlier, right? I mean, being curious about what other content works well in the platform and the algorithm, and then using that to adapt how you show up.
Exactly, and it can be incredibly powerful and incredibly useful. It's a really good platform, and certainly I encourage CEOs, if they're not on it, to be on it, and to also pay attention to your LinkedIn profile, because I really try to keep it. I really try to curate it pretty consistently to ensure that it's still contemporary
Yeah.
and up to date.
I love this little tactic that you snuck in there. You're not a graphic designer, but you know how to do PowerPoint slides. And so it sounds like what you were describing is you just use PowerPoint to drag some pictures in
Yeah,
there so
yeah.
that you can create that collage, and then what, you save the PowerPoint as a different file
Yeah,
format or something.
you save it as a picture, basically, and you can do any slide. And that's the beauty of it, is that PowerPoint, because of the designer feature, the AI that they've integrated, it's as powerful as using Adobe Illustrator, Canva, or Photoshop. I mean, sometimes people feel like, my marketing department has to design all these things for me. I don't actually. I mean, our team does a few things for me on occasion, but I actually think if you can make it more organic to yourself,
No.
it looks better. What I haven't quite cracked is video. I don't do a lot of video content.
Yeah.
And I do know that putting native video up there is better with the algorithm than clicking, sending people over to a YouTube link. So that's one of the things that I think, this is one of the aspects, again, about being a chief influencer, is thinking about what gets the content in front of your audience.
Yeah.
And I think, the more people can think about it, the better.
Do you have people on your team that are kind of scared that you don't give them the keys to your LinkedIn, and they're sort of like, "Hey, you sure you don't want us to just take that over for you?"
I'm sure I do. They haven't told me yet, but I'm sure our marketing. Actually, no, I don't think so. The team knows. So the funny thing is, and I know that our marketing team, I believe, would agree with you, is that I am actually very, very dogmatic about things like color palette, making
Mhm.
sure that we're being consistent with the
Okay, you
brand
stay on
standards.
brand.
I totally stay on brand. I mean, I know the four-letter code for all of our brand colors, because I'm very particular that if I'm using an orange box around my pictures, that it is the National MS Society web orange.
Got it.
And I do think it's important to pay attention to those things. I do occasionally sneak in something I created in Canva, which I know gives them, hives to think about. But I do try to be, I very faithful to the brand.
Well, and look, I think, we all realize nowadays that you can have this perfect polished marketing, and sometimes that's what we have to do. But things that are authentic and that are
Yeah,
done more quickly, sometimes actually it's better to just get it up there, and it's okay if it's not, doesn't look like an advertisement, because it's a photo from an event. People
yeah,
expect, and it was taken on your phone. We all know how these things work nowadays, and
yeah,
authenticity can really shine more than that
yeah.
sort of polish, and and professionalism that we go for in other settings, which is not that it's never important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think, I think, and part of it is I do think it's a partnership between me and the marketing team and the
Yeah.
content team thinking about the story. I mean, the group knows me that I care about this and that I'm very passionate about it, and that I'm also trying to
Yeah.
support the team and the brand narrative that we're going for as an organization. So I don't go rogue, not a
Yeah.
rogue. One time out of 100, uh,
Okay.
I'll go rogue.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Let me ask you one last question before we wrap up here, Tim. I want to know just what advice you have for aspiring leaders or current leaders about the power of influence. If you look
Mhm.
back across your career, just love to hear what advice you have
Yeah.
about influence.
Yeah, I think again to come back, I touched it on it earlier. The the it is really important as influencers to think about how we leverage our influence and our position for good. As you become, more and more senior in an organization, you have increasing opportunities to go places to change, have a significant impact on people and their careers, and to leverage that influence for good is really one of the things that is so important to me as a leader that I want to model. And I would just say to your audience is that, one, aspire to lead. Anybody can be a leader within whatever position you are, but to leverage that leadership for good, and to just think about also how you can how you can help people become more than where they are today. It's also something that I just think is so important as a leader and as a chief influencer. It thrills me when I see individuals that I've had an opportunity to intersect with, and to to give them some wisdom and insight, become these leaders in different places and become senior leaders themselves, leading other people. That kind of paying it forward is something that I believe as chief influencers, every one of us should do, and what the world needs today. We need more chief influencers thinking about the good they can create, both within the organizations they lead, but also within the people that they have an opportunity to influence and steward. And if we do that more and more, we create a great world.
That is so well said. And I have to say, Tim, something that I've learned from doing so many of these interviews and that you really reinforced is that, people have a big title like, chief influencer or a member of Congress or excuse me, chief executive, member of Congress, ambassador. That's a title that they had to earn that somebody else gave them, right? They had to get hired by a board or elected by constituents. But this title of chief influencer, we have to choose to embrace that.
Yeah,
We have to
agreed.
decide I am going to use the power of my personal brand and the power of my influence to, as you said so well, do good. Let's use influence for good. And when we look at your career, scientist, advocate, leader as CEO of the National MS Society, working on various facets of that issue for 30 years now plus, and how you have shown up to influence inside the organization. And as a leader, those lessons that you shared about making sure folks are comfortable speaking up and sharing their
Mhm.
doubts, making that human connection as you did in the town hall, being vulnerable. Hey, you can ask me anything and not filtering those questions. And then going out more publicly, like you do on LinkedIn. And in that case, I just think folks are going to be so fascinated hearing that you manage that yourself, other than that moment when you had them update your title to CEO right when you were presenting. So you couldn't obviously do it then. And even you're a makeshift graphic designer using PowerPoint, staying on brand standards as your team wants you to, so that you can get images up there and get the message out on that platform. So many lessons of influence, but that umbrella that they're all under, you of course shared the four pillars of your work, but that influence for good. If you show up and do this, you can make a positive impact in your community, in the world, and you don't have to have the title of chief executive to embrace this role of chief influencer. Whether someone's a chief executive or whether they're just starting out, there's so many lessons that you shared today that any of us can apply. So thank you so much for being with us today, Tim,
Mm.
to share your story. Dr. Tim Coetzee from the National MS Society. I hope folks will go check out the National MS Society website, LinkedIn company page, but also check out Tim's personal LinkedIn page and follow him, and you'll see some of those updates. And now we know they're things you made yourself. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.